Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Sarah, and I'm a team member here at Test Innovators. The focus of today's webinar is everything you need to know about the ACT. This webinar will be recorded, and I will be sending out a copy of the recording after the webinar. So without further ado, let's get started. So to start, I would like to share a little bit about what we do here at Test Innovators. We've helped over 150,000 students prepare for entrance exams and get into the most selective schools. We also work with hundreds of tutoring companies, educational consultants at schools across the country. I'm going to quickly go over the agenda for today's webinar. Today, we'll be covering an overview of the ACT, in which we'll discuss the test scores, structure, and sections. We'll also talk about general test taking strategies, as well as section-specific strategies. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to type questions in the Q&A. If we have time at the end, I'll answer those questions. But if there are any that I don't get to, I'll be sure to email you a response along with the webinar recording. The ACT is a college entrance exam, and the essays and scores from the tests are used by college admissions officers to make admissions decisions. The ACT can be taken as many times as needed and is offered up to 7 times a year. Currently, the test is primarily on paper, though more spread online testing will be available soon. Now we'll go over the ACT scoring. Students get 1 point for every correct answer and 0 point for questions that are incorrect or left blank. So there's no wrong answer penalty. So make sure to answer every question. The total score ranges from 1 to 36, and then each section gets a score ranging from 1 to 36. So the sections are math, science, English, reading, and writing. So the writing is scored based on ideas and analysis, development support, organization, language use and conventions, and the essays will have basically, you'll get 2 scores from 2 to 12, and then those scores will be averaged. So you'll get section scores of 1 to 36 for the multiple choice sections, from 2 to 12 to the writing section, and you'll get a total score, an overall score, also called the composite score, from 1 to 36. A question we often get is, what is considered a good score? The answer is always, it depends. So to understand what a good score is to you, check out the ACT score scattergrams for your target school scores. These will tell you, what you need to know about what the average score is, and if students with similar scores from you were able to get admission to that school. Your school may also provide software to show test score, GPA, and admissions information for colleges. The test structure for the ACT includes 5 tests or sections, including the writing sample. The test breakdown is as follows. You have the English test, which is 45 minutes, the math test, which is 60 minutes. Then you get a 10-minute break. Then you have the reading test, which is 40 minutes, the science test, which is 35 minutes, a 5-minute break, and then the optional writing test, which is another 40 minutes. So now we're going to dive into each section of the test. To start, we're going to discuss the English section. The ACT English section consists of multiple choice questions that each have 4 options. Overall, the section is 5 passages with 15 questions each. That's 75 questions total. And the topics are usage of mechanics, which measures a bunch of different things, including correctly formatting and joining sentences, correct use of commas, dashes, and colons, correctly using non-essential clauses and relative pronouns, and correct verb tense and forms. You will also have questions on rhetorical skills, which includes logical transitions, additional information, conciseness, and replacing and rewording information. Now we'll move on to an overview of the math section. The math section is made up of multiple choice questions. On this section, students choose between five options, 5 answer choices. The questions in the math section are roughly ordered by difficulty. Questions 1 to 20 are easy, questions 21 to 40 are medium, and questions 41 to 60 are considered hard questions. There are quite a few topics covered on the ACT, and they are as follows. So you have pre-algebra, which includes basic operations, factors, ratios, absolute value, the basics. Then we have elementary algebra, which includes things like exponents, square roots, substitution, algebraic operations, solving quadratics by factoring, etc. And then intermediate algebra, which would involve things like the quadratic formula, rational and radical expressions, absolute value equations, systems of equations, matrices, complex numbers. And then we have coordinate geometry, or plane geometry. We have graphing, slope, parallel, perpendicular lines, the distance formula, midpoints, and conics. And then plane geometry, which would include things like angles, circles, shapes, triangles, proofs, volume, that sort of thing. And finally, trigonometry, which would involve trigonometric relations and trigonometric functions, and sine, cosine, that sort of thing. Okay, so now we're going to dive into the reading sections. Again, the reading section is a multiple choice section, and it gives students 4 options to choose from. There are 35 questions overall. The questions will ask about things like the main idea, details, words in context, test structure, and inference. The passages tend to be about fiction or literature, social science, such as economics, psychology, or sociology, as well as education, humanities, such as the arts, media, and philosophy, and science, natural science, such as biology, chemistry, and physics. Next, we have the ACT science section. The science section consists of 40 questions, which are based on 6 to 7 passages. Once again, these are multiple choice questions with 4 answer choice options. The passages are either going to be research summaries, data representation, or conflicting viewpoints. Topics you may see discussed in these passages are biology, chemistry, earth space science, and physics. And now these are less about diving into, the specific knowledge you get in a like a biology or a chemistry class. It's not going to rely on that. It's not a content test, but rather it's about you're being able to read the passage and interpret the passage and understand the data being presented, etc. Okay, now we're going to dive into the optional ACT writing section. You'll receive 1 prompt about a complex issue, which will present 3 different viewpoints. You will have to analyze the 3 different viewpoints and explain your own viewpoint on the issue, describing the relationship between your viewpoint and the 3 viewpoints provided. Now that we've introduced all the sections, I'm going to go over some preparation strategies for the ACT. Typically, students begin the prep process in the late spring of their sophomore year. A great place to start is to take a benchmark practice test. This test can serve as a jumping off point, and you can prepare based on those results and the results you wish to achieve. You can also find the areas that need work. It's important to review solutions and understand how to solve the questions you missed. That's one great way to start improving. And then based on what you've missed, do targeted practice. This means having a focus area and clear objectives for your study sessions. So practice those specific skills and question types until you feel more confident. Then take another practice test to measure your improvement and repeat. Follow the same steps again and again until you end up taking the test, I would say in the spring of your junior year. So how do you decide between the SAT and the ACT? Many schools accept both the SAT and ACT. So how does a student choose which test to focus on? One great thing to do is take a full-length practice test for each and see which one, if any, goes better. And think about what parts you liked and disliked about each test. So some things to consider are the timing. Was there one where the timing was much easier? The SAT has grid-in questions, which some students find more challenging, some students find a little easier. So that's important to keep in mind. The SAT does provide some formulas like area and volume formulas. The ACT has a science section, which the SAT is lacking. So that could, for many students, pushes them more towards the SAT, but some students really like the science section. Oh, and one more thing is the ACT and the SAT have different rules on calculators. So the SAT has a non-calculator section. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you're deciding which test to take. And some students end up taking both tests. So now we'll talk about some overall strategies. First up is the elimination strategy. We'll talk about specific elimination strategies for each section in a bit, but here's the general elimination strategy for the test. So the general idea is that because the test is multiple choice, we want to use the structure of the test, that multiple choice structure, to our advantage. We know the answer is somewhere there. So anytime we can get rid of a few of those options, it's excellent. Using the process of elimination is especially useful if you have no idea how to answer or approach a question, or if you're running out of time. It involves crossing off answers that you're sure are incorrect, and then making an educated guess or solving to see what the answer is. So there's no wrong answer penalty for the ACT, so just make sure to answer any question. That's sort of the guessing strategy. If you're not sure and once you've gone through the process of elimination, guess and move on to the next question. Which leads into time management. So using your time effectively is critical. Every correct answer gives you the same number of points. You get 1 point for every correct answer. So your goal is to answer as many questions as possible. Don't waste valuable time on a hard question when you could instead answer 3 easy questions correctly with the same amount of time. So don't waste your time. If you're not sure, guess and move on. Another way to handle this is you can, group questions by difficulty, easy and hard. So every time you read a question, ask yourself, do I know how to do this? If the answer is yes, I absolutely know how to do this, do the question. If your answer is maybe, or I'm not really sure, mark an answer for the question and circle it in your test booklet to come back to it later. Actually, marking an answer on your bubble sheet helps you prevent errors in your bubble sheet. So you definitely want to put something down, and maybe you won't have time to come back to it. And then at least you have, a 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 chance of getting it right. But mark an answer and come back to it later. So The second step, of course, is to work on hard questions after you've answered all of the easy questions. So in summary, answer all the easy questions first and then work on the hard questions. So with limited time, it's most effective to skim the reading passages and underline the important information, such as repeated words and the first and last sentences. That being said, don't rush too much. You want to make sure you comprehend what you read. So it's really important to keep track of time during the test. You're allowed to wear a watch, so we definitely recommend that to help you stay on track. It's also important to know the average time per question for each section. So if you find you're a little behind, you'll want to try to work a little more quickly. And if you're ahead, you can slow down a bit. Practicing and experiencing what it feels like to have a limited time to answer questions is critical. Therefore, be sure to take your practice tests timed, just so you get a feel for how that's going to go when you actually take the test. Okay, let's get into strategies for each section, starting with English strategies. The English section of the ACT and the Writing and Languages section of the SAT consists of passages and questions. The questions refer to an underlined portion of the passage, a section of the passage, or the passage as a whole. For questions that refer to an underlined portion of the passage, it's best to read a sentence or two before the underlined portion and a sentence or two after, rather than read the entire passage. For questions that refer to the passage as a whole, make sure to read the entire passage. So sometimes it makes sense to do them out of order. Do the specific questions first and then come back to the ones that deal with the passage as a whole at the end. Try filling in the blank before looking at the answer choices, and then after selecting an answer, reread the sentence using your choice to make sure it's correct. So if you try to think of your own answer first and fill in the blank before looking at the answer choices, you're more likely to avoid sort of common pitfalls and answers that are designed to look good but aren't really correct. And if you think of your own answer first. Now let's go over some math strategies and tips. Okay. Most importantly, make sure you read the question first. Underline important words and numbers, pay attention to the units, this is very important, and check that you answered the right question. So make sure you reread what the question's asking. For example, is it asking you to solve for x, or is it asking you to solve for x plus 4? Definitely draw pictures. It's often really helpful to draw pictures. So if it could be helpful to draw a picture for a particular question, definitely do so. And always be sure to write down your work on the scratch paper. It's so much easier to do work on paper rather than trying to do it in your head. Other strategies include using estimation. It can be a powerful tool for eliminating wrong answer choices. So for every question, before you begin to solve, know sort of a ballpark of what you think the right answer should be. So, if it's closer to 1 or closer to 100, if, it's going to be somewhere closer to 1 and one of the answers is 10,000, then that one's most likely wrong. For some questions, the jumping off point is in the answers, so it's helpful to work backwards. For questions with an unknown quantity, you can substitute the answer choices for the unknown quantity to see which one is correct. So always you want to start with the middle answer choice to minimize the number of answers you have to substitute. So you'll be able, if you start with the middle answer choice, you can, if that one's not it, you can usually tell if it needs to be a larger or smaller number, and then you can, more quickly get to the right answer choice that way. And sometimes the math questions may seem very challenging to solve abstractly. In cases like these, it can be helpful to use actual numbers to determine the answer. So you can pick a value and substitute for many of these answer choices. If it's, so totally abstract, it's often just faster to say, okay, I'm gonna pick a value and work with concrete numbers. Now we're going to go over some reading strategies to approach questions and eliminate answer choices. So you're going to want to read the passage and the question and try to come up with your own answer before going over the answer choices. Again, this can help you avoid falling into the trap of the answer choices that are designed to look really tempting and designed to look correct, but are in fact incorrect. So try to think of your own answer before going to the answer choices for the reading section. Then you're going to want to read the answer choices that are given and find evidence in the text that supports these choices. This is really important. Always remember that the answer has to be supported by the text. So make sure and check that the connection is there. In general, you want to avoid answer choices that are too extreme. If you see answer choices with words like only, always, never, or other extreme words, these are unlikely to be the correct answer. You should only choose them if you're absolutely sure that the sentiment is in the passage as well. Also, avoid answer choices that are too specific or too broad or general. These are unlikely to be the correct answer. So the answer choice scope should reflect the scope of the question. So make sure you know the scope of the question and the scope of the answer choice that you're going to select match. Now we'll move on to strategies for the science section. So the science section of the ACT consists of 3 types of passages: research summaries, data representation, and conflicting viewpoints. The section covers biology, chemistry, earth, space science, and physics. So you want to read the passage carefully. Then, if necessary, reread the parts of the passage that pertain to each question. The passage will always provide all of the information needed to answer the question. If any part of the answer choice doesn't match the information given in the passage, it is incorrect. Read and consider all of the answer choices before choosing the one that best answers the question. So as I mentioned earlier, the science section it's its own section, but it's not gonna make you rely on the knowledge you gain in your science classes. And it's more like a reading comprehension section in that you're given these passages and you have to answer questions about them, and you're always looking for evidence in the passages. So if you haven't taken biology, chemistry, earth, space science, and physics yet, it's okay. You don't need to have those classes in order to complete the science section on the ACT. Finally, we're going to talk about strategies for the writing section. So although the writing section for the ACT is optional, some schools do require it. So you're going to want to check with your school, the schools you're applying to see what their expectations are for the writing sample. First things first, you want to read the prompt carefully and make sure you respond to each part in your essay. For the ACT, the prompt describes a complex issue along with 3 different viewpoints on that issue. You are required to evaluate and analyze the 3 different viewpoints, explain your own viewpoint on the issue, and then describe the relationship between your viewpoint and the 3 viewpoints provided. So make sure you follow those directions. With limited time to write, managing your time effectively is incredibly important. Start by spending the first 2 to 5 minutes outlining your work. After you have a plan, go ahead and get writing. This is where you'll spend the bulk of the time. You'll need to watch the clock and save yourself 2 to 5 minutes at the end for review. Your essay should have a clear, focused topic that directly answers the given question. Your writing should include examples and specific details. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A feature on the Zoom display. If you joined us a little later, I just want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and I will send out a copy of this recording to everyone after the webinar. So you will be able to watch the whole thing or review any parts that you'd like to. Okay, so if you don't have any questions now, you can always, contact us with any questions in the future. We're here 7 days a week. So you can check out our site at testinnovators.com/ACT and receive free scoring and analysis on a full-length official practice test. If you're not sure where to start, a great place is with a 20-minute consultation with one of our online tutors. And yes, absolutely feel free to contact us anytime at support@testinnovators.com. And that's 1-800-280-1857. That's our phone number. And as a thank you for joining us for this webinar, please do feel free to use the coupon code for $10 off the Ultimate Package. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great evening. Bye now.